The first sign that something was wrong was silence. Not the ordinary silence of deep space, which everyone on Titan Station had long stopped noticing. This was a different kind. The kind that arrived when every sensor, every relay dish, every communication line stopped working at the exact same moment. The kind of silence that had been planned. Titan's Defense Operations Room registered the blackout at 22:07 station time. By 22:09, the duty officer had confirmed it was not a system fault. By 22:11, the first Vreth carrier signatures appeared on the backup optical sensors, the only instruments that could not be jammed because they used no signal at all. They simply looked, and what they saw, coming out of the dark on the far side of Saturn's rings, was too large and too organized to be anything but what it was. An invasion fleet. Colonel Ines Farrow was not in the operations room when it happened. She was in Sublevel 9, walking a routine inspection of the fuel processing tunnels, the kind of task that senior officers were not supposed to do, but that Farrow had always done because she believed in seeing things with her own eyes. She heard the emergency tone through a wall speaker, recognized its pattern, and did not run. Running, she had learned over 22 years of service, made the people around you panic. She walked quickly, told the two technicians with her to get to their emergency stations, and made it to the nearest command post in 3 minutes. What she found there was not chaos. It was something worse. It was people doing their jobs correctly while the situation ate through every option they had. The Vreth had not simply jammed communications and sent in ships. They had planned this for a long time. Gravity well mines, small and almost undetectable, had been seeded in the approach corridors weeks earlier, disguised in the signal noise of Saturn's magnetosphere. The moment the jamming went active, those mines went active too, and every fast response vessel in Titan's dock found its launch trajectory blocked. Any ship that tried to push through would be pulled into a collision with its neighbor. The docks were frozen. The fleet could not move. At the same time, Vreth boarding craft came from the other direction entirely, from below, rising up through Titan's thin atmosphere from a landing point on the moon's surface that no one had been watching because no one had thought to watch it. There was no rule against landing on Titan's surface. The Vreth had done it slowly, over 6 weeks, in small groups, each group looking like a survey team. Farrow looked at the tactical display and understood in about 40 seconds what had taken the Vreth planners years to build. Then she looked at the civilian population count on the secondary screen. 380,000 people. Families. Children. Workers who had come to this moon to process fuel and build ships and live ordinary lives. She made her decision. She keyed the garrison-wide channel and spoke clearly. This is Colonel Farrow. Stand down. All units, stand down. Do not engage. Protect civilians and await further orders. Then she switched to the emergency recording system, one of the few things still working because it ran on a local isolated battery, and she recorded a transmission. Her voice did not shake. To Earth Command. Titan Station has been taken by Vreth Dominion forces through a coordinated ambush. I am ordering the garrison to stand down to prevent civilian casualties. We are 380,000 strong, and we are intact. We are not surrendering the future. We are preserving the people who will reclaim it. She closed the recording and turned to the signals officer in the room, a young lieutenant named Dario Metz, who was 26 years old and had been on Titan for 8 months. He was looking at the dead communications board with an expression that was not fear. It was concentration. Can you get anything through? She asked. She nodded and left him to it. The Vreth arrived at sublevel 9 40 minutes later. By then, Farrow had organized the garrison personnel into orderly groups, confiscated their weapons openly, and set them in a visible pile near the main corridor entrance, and made sure every civilian in the sublevel was accounted for. When the Vreth soldiers came through the door, hard-shelled and forearmed, smelling of something chemical and sharp, they found Colonel Ines Farrow standing in the open with her hands at her sides. She did not salute them. She did not speak first. She simply looked at the lead soldier and waited for him to confirm what was already obvious. What she did not know was what Metz had been doing in the room she had left him in. He had stripped 2 emergency locator beacons and a short-range maintenance relay unit, working with a focus that blocked out the sounds of the station changing hands around him. He had been trained in signal construction at Earth's Communications Academy, and he knew things about narrow-band burst transmission that were not in any standard manual, because he had worked them out himself during long, slow shifts when there was nothing else to do. He built a transmitter from those parts in 31 minutes. It should not have been possible. He made it possible. He aimed it at the gap in the Vreth jamming field that he had calculated must exist, because no jamming field was perfect at the boundary between Saturn's magnetic influence and open space, and he fired a single compressed burst transmission. Everything he knew, everything he had seen, encoded, compressed, wrapped in Pharaoh's recording, and sent. Then the door opened, and the Vreth soldiers were there, and he put his hands up. The burst transmission arrived at Earth in fragments. 30 seconds of audio, partially torn by the interference it had fought through, corrupted in places beyond recovery. But it arrived. Across the galaxy, the news of Titan's fall spread faster than Earth's own ships could carry it, because the Sorith Collective had listening posts everywhere, and the Sorith Collective sold information. Within hours, the Galactic Concord had called an emergency session. Delegates from 32 species gathered in the Great Chamber on Concord Station, their seats arranged in a half-circle around a central floor where speakers stood to make their cases. Ambassador Priya Nand took the human delegation's seat alone. Her 2 aides sat behind her. She was 53 years old, had spent 30 of those years in galactic diplomacy, and had never once raised her voice in a session chamber. She did not raise it now. She sat straight-backed and listened while the Sorith delegate, bioluminescent patterns rippling across his skin in what Nand had learned was the Sorith equivalent of excitement, proposed that the Galactic Concord recognize Vreth's sovereignty over Titan Station in the interest of regional stability. The vote was called. 31 delegations voted in favor. 1 voted against. Nand pressed the single red button at her station without looking at it. After the session ended, she walked out of the chamber past delegates who did not make eye contact with her. One of the Duran Republic's diplomats touched her arm gently and said that Earth should pursue a diplomatic resolution, that the Concord would support a negotiated outcome. Nand looked at him for a moment and said nothing. Then she walked on. At Earth's Strategic Command Center, Admiral Riva Okafor received the confirmed report at 0340 local time. She was already there. She had been there since the jamming signal was first detected, standing at the central display, watching data come in, watching it be interrupted, watching it come in again. When the final confirmation arrived, she stood still for a while. The room was quiet. The people at their stations did not look at her directly. They watched their screens and waited. Then Okafor walked to the fleet management console, pulled up the active roster of every ship, crew, and installation under Earth's command, and began reviewing them. Not out of grief, not out of anger, out of something colder and more precise. After 10 minutes, she looked up. Get Director Stroud on a secure line. Tell him the contingency conversation we had 3 years ago is no longer a hypothetical. She paused and began reconstruction protocols. Nobody in that room cheered. Nobody said anything at all. They turned back to their screens and started working. Outside, on the far side of the solar system, Titan Station changed its access codes to Vreth frequencies, and 380,000 human beings went to sleep in rooms they no longer controlled. The galaxy assumed that was the end of it. The galaxy was wrong. Numbers do not lie. That was the first thing Hal Stroud had learned when he was a young analyst, and it was the thing he still believed after 30 years of working in rooms where powerful people wanted numbers to say something other than what they said. Numbers did not care what you wanted. They simply were. He laid them out for the War Council on the 3rd day after Titan's fall, in a room on the 14th floor of Earth's Strategic Planning Building in Nairobi. No windows. A long table, 12 people, and a wall display that he filled with figures that nobody in the room wanted to look at, but all of them needed to see. Without Titan's refinery capacity, Earth's deep space fleet could reach roughly 30% of its former operational range before running dry. The long-range exploration vessels, the heavy cargo haulers, the patrol ships that kept the outer colonies connected, all of them would have to be recalled or rerouted through secondary fueling points that could not handle the volume. Effective fleet reach would collapse within 8 months. Without Titan's shipyards, building a new capital ship would take 4 years instead of 14 months. Repair work on damaged vessels would have to be distributed across facilities that were not built for it. The military would be functioning on what it already had, with no meaningful way to replace losses. The Vreth Dominion's analysts had done the same math. Stroud knew this because he had spent the better part of a decade studying how the Vreth planned military operations, and they were very good at math too. They had looked at these numbers, concluded that Earth's effective capacity as a space power would degrade past the point of recovery in approximately 12 to 15 years without Titan, and decided that an aging fleet and no shipyard meant no threat. They expected Earth to spend those years negotiating for the return of the station while slowly becoming too weak to back the negotiation with anything real. It was a logical conclusion. It was also wrong. Stroud clicked to the next screen. "This is the second document," he said. "I prepared the first version 3 years ago. I updated it 6 months ago. I updated it again 2 weeks before the attack, when the Vreth supply movements in the outer system started showing a pattern that concerned me." General Wei, the head of Earth's ground forces, leaned forward. "You anticipated this?" "I anticipated the possibility," Stroud said. "There is a difference. I did not know when, or if, but I have always believed that Titan was too valuable and too exposed, and that at some point in our history someone would try to take it. So I built a plan for what to do if that happened." He let them read the document title on the screen. Operation Bedrock. The plan was not, as several of the council members expected, a blueprint for retaking Titan. It did not involve a counterstrike, a siege, or any kind of direct military action against the Vreth. It was something that several people in the room found difficult to understand at first, because it did not think in terms of recovering what was lost. It thought in terms of making the loss irrelevant. Instead of a single large station, Earth would build a distributed network, 47 smaller facilities spread across asteroid fields, gas giant ring systems, and deep space waypoints throughout Earth's operational zone. Each facility would be independently capable of refining fuel and performing essential ship repairs. Each would be hardened, partially concealed within its local environment, and designed to look like something else from the outside: a mining operation, a research outpost, a navigation relay station. No single facility would carry enough operational importance that losing it would matter. The network as a whole, once complete, would process 120% of Titan's former output. The Vreth had taken Titan and crippled Earth's single point of supply. Operation Bedrock would ensure that Earth never had a single point of anything again. Admiral Okafor, sitting at the far end of the table, had been quiet through most of the briefing. She looked at the projected completion timeline. "How long?" 11 months to reach 80% operational capacity, Stroud said. 14 months to full capacity. We have the materials. Most of them were already stockpiled. That was part of the contingency. We need to move them and build, and we need to do it without making it obvious what we are doing. "The Vreth will be watching us," said Director of Intelligence, Lena Pohl. "Yes," Stroud said, "and they will be watching for what they expect to see. A species that has just lost its central installation will try to build a new central installation. That is what every other species in the Concord has done after a major loss. We are not going to do that. We are going to build 47 things that each individually look like nothing important. Their surveillance will watch the obvious locations. They will not watch 47 small, boring, scattered facilities." There was a pause. Then General Wei said, "You want us to hide the recovery in plain sight." "I want us to distribute it so thoroughly that there is nothing worth hiding," Stroud said. "Hiding implies a secret. A secret is a single thing that can be discovered. This is a network. If they find one facility, they find one facility. The other 46 keep running." The council voted. It was not unanimous, but it was enough. Stroud walked out of the room with authorization to begin, and he went directly to the logistics division and started assigning construction teams before the day was over. Earth's economy shifted in the weeks that followed in ways that were real but quiet. Civilian manufacturing companies received contract offers. The offers came from various government bodies with different names, and each individual contract looked ordinary: mining equipment, structural components, environmental processing systems. The companies accepted because the money was good, and they did not ask many questions because the paperwork was all in order. Across the galaxy, the Vreth Dominion's intelligence service filed regular reports on Earth's activity. The reports noted increased manufacturing output, elevated shipping traffic in the outer solar system, and evidence of large-scale construction planning. The analysts reviewed this data carefully and reached a conclusion that was completely reasonable given everything they knew about how species behaved. Earth was trying to build a replacement for Titan. They estimated it would take 8 years. They recommended monitoring the most likely construction sites. They listed 7 locations. None of the 7 locations were anywhere near the first 14 nodes of Operation Bedrock, which were quietly going up in the dark of the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, each one disguised as an automated mining claim. Ambassador Priya Nand, meanwhile, was doing something that looked from the outside like grief translated into paperwork. She filed 11 procedural challenges to the Concorde's recognition vote, each one arguing a different technical violation of the Charter's voting rules. She requested humanitarian access to Titan Station for independent observers. She submitted a formal demand for weekly status reports on the health and condition of the 380,000 civilians being held on the station. She requested an emergency economic review of the impact of the station's capture on Earth's dependent colony worlds. None of it was going to succeed. She knew that. The Concorde's administrative machinery would process each challenge slowly, respond with carefully worded rejections, and do nothing. But processing a challenge required Vreth diplomatic staff to respond to it, which took their attention. Reviewing a humanitarian access request required the Concorde's Welfare Committee to hold a session, which took the time of delegates who would otherwise be talking to each other about Earth's long-term weakness. Every piece of paperwork Nand filed was a small stone thrown into a large machine, and while one stone changed nothing, 11 stones meant the machine was always grinding on something other than the question of what to do about Earth. By time, that was what she was doing. She was very good at it. On the 14th day after Titan's fall, Earth's Signals Intelligence Division completed the reconstruction of Dario Metz's burst transmission. The audio was partial, broken in places, some sections permanently unrecoverable. But between the recovered fragments and some very careful signal analysis, the team found something that had not been obvious in the first reviews: a compressed data packet embedded in the transmission's carrier wave, invisible unless you were specifically looking for something there. They extracted it. It was a schematic file, dense and precisely organized. Metz had mapped the entire interior of Titan Station as modified by the Vreth in their first hours of occupation, drawing on a maintenance camera feed that the Vreth had not thought to shut down because it was not connected to any communication system. They had not known it existed. Metz had known because he had been the one to install it, 8 months earlier, as part of a routine systems upgrade. He had watched their engineering teams work for hours, noted every modification they made to every system he could see, and encoded it all in a format small enough to fit inside 30 seconds of noise. When Lena Pohl brought the schematic file to Stroud and Okafor, there was a long silence while all 3 of them looked at it. Then Okafor said, "He is either the luckiest officer we have ever fielded, or the most prepared one. Does it matter which?" Stroud said. "No," Okafor said. "It does not." She studied the schematic for a while longer. "File this. We will need it." Outside, the galaxy watched Earth the way you watch something you believe is dying. With patience. With the quiet certainty that it was only a matter of time. In the asteroid belt, 14 construction crews worked double shifts in the dark, and nobody who was watching them. The arithmetic was changing. The galaxy had not noticed yet. 8 months after the fall of Titan, the Sorith Collective broadcast a special media package to 63 inhabited systems. It was called The Shape of What Remains, and it was a 2-hour documentary about humanity's decline as a galactic power. The Sorith were gifted at this kind of thing. Their bioluminescent communication arrays could carry rich media across long distances, and they had built an audience over centuries by being the first to cover anything worth covering. They framed the documentary carefully, not cruel, not mocking, but sad in the way that stories about endings are always a little sad. They showed footage of Earth's busy ports slowing down. They interviewed Duran Republic economists who talked in careful, academic language about what the loss of Titan meant for human trade capacity. They included a segment of Ambassador Nand walking out of the Concorde chamber after the recognition vote, filmed from a distance, her back straight and her face unreadable. The documentary received strong viewership numbers across 22 species networks. Several Concorde delegates cited it in their communications as evidence that the situation had stabilized. What the Sorith had filmed, without understanding what they were filming, was a species in the middle of the fastest strategic rebuild in galactic history. The Galactic Concord's formal summit on post-conflict regional restructuring was held at Meridian Hub, the Sorith Collective's massive neutral station positioned between three systems at the edge of what the Concord called the Inner Settled Zone. It was an enormous structure, built to accommodate species of wildly different sizes and atmospheric needs, a place that smelled different in every corridor and where the lighting changed color depending on which section you were in. Nand arrived 2 days early and spent both days walking the station. Not sightseeing. She had been here before. She was learning where the delegates were staying, who was meeting whom before the formal sessions began, and what the general mood was. She was good at reading rooms. She was better at reading buildings. The mood, she concluded, was one of comfortable certainty. The Vreth delegation was large and confident. The Sorith representatives were everywhere at once, as they always were, their skin patterns flickering with what Nand recognized as the particular frequency associated with commercial satisfaction. The smaller species delegations were mostly waiting to see what the large ones decided, as they mostly always did. Nobody was worried about Earth. That, Nand thought, was the most useful thing that had happened in 8 months. The summit began formally on the 3rd day. The Vreth delegation presented their proposal for a long-term administrative arrangement for Titan Station, framed in language that turned annexation into stewardship and occupation into management. They were careful and precise. Their lead diplomat, a tall insectoid named something that translated roughly as Overseer Rek, presented the document with the quiet confidence of someone reading a conclusion that had already been written. Nan sat in the human delegation's chair and took notes. She asked 2 technical questions about the proposed inspection regime. She requested a clarification on the language around civilian welfare. She was polite, attentive, and gave no indication of what she was thinking. During the midday recess, she was approached by Counselor Durin, the Durin Republic's senior delegate, a tall pale gray being with large dark eyes who had always struck Nand as genuinely decent and genuinely limited by his own certainty that the universe behaved in predictable ways. "Ambassador Nand," he said, falling into step beside her in the corridor outside the main chamber. "I hope you are well." "Thank you, Counselor." "I wanted to speak with you privately," he said, "because I have a great deal of respect for humanity, and I would not want to see Earth's position become worse than it already is." He paused as a group of Sorith officials passed them. The modified proposal being circulated informally would give Earth a formal consultative role in Titan's administration. It is not what you want, but it is something. It preserves your legal connection to the station without requiring you to fight a battle you cannot win. He looked at her with his dark eyes. "You cannot fight them, Ambassador. Not anymore. Not without Titan." Nand walked a few more steps before answering. "Counselor," she said, "we haven't needed Titan for 3 months." He stopped walking. She did not. She continued down the corridor at the same pace and turned left toward the smaller conference rooms where Earth's delegation had set up its working space. The Durin counselor stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he went to find his senior aide and asked him to pull up everything they had on Earth's recent construction and logistics activity, because something in the ambassador's voice had not sounded like a bluff. The aide came back 2 hours later with a report that raised more questions than it answered. There was increased activity. A lot of it distributed across Earth's operational zone in a pattern that did not match any recognized strategic playbook. Multiple small installations, apparently mining and research related, each individually insignificant. No large centralized construction project. The aide said it did not look like much. Counselor Durin read the report carefully and thought about what Nand had said, and found that he could not quite dismiss the feeling that he was missing something. In the main session that afternoon, Nand raised a question that was not on the agenda. She asked the Concord's Administrative Bureau to confirm the current legal status of the 380,000 civilians on Titan Station, and specifically the conditions under which their situation was classified as resolved. The Sorith delegate immediately pointed out that this was not part of the day's proceedings. Nand said she understood and submitted the question as a formal inquiry, which meant it had to be acknowledged and logged and eventually answered. Overseer Rek of the Vreth delegation watched her do this and concluded that she was a skilled irritant with no actual leverage. He filed a report that evening to the Dominion Strategic. He was not wrong about her being skilled. He was deeply wrong about the leverage. Because at the same moment that Overseer Rek was composing his report on Meridian Hub, 3,100 light seconds away in the dark of the outer asteroid belt, Node 14 of Operation Bedrock completed its first full operational cycle. Refined fuel, produced without Titan, loaded into a waiting transport that carried no Earth military markings, heading for a distribution waypoint that was logged in no public manifest. Stroud received the confirmation at his desk in Nairobi and updated the progress chart. 85% of Titan's former capacity was now achievable from the network. The final stretch of construction was running ahead of schedule because the construction teams had stopped worrying about being careful and were now simply working as fast as they could without making visible mistakes. They were almost ready. Back on Titan, deep in a detention block on Sublevel 3, Lieutenant Dario Metz was writing a letter to his younger sister. It was a real letter, approved by the Vreth administrative staff who monitored all correspondence, and it said ordinary things, that he was healthy, that the food was tolerable, that he hoped she was doing well in her engineering program. The Vreth monitor who reviewed it every week had flagged it 3 times in the first month for cryptographic scanning, found nothing, and after that stopped reading it carefully. The monitor had not been trained to recognize a compression algorithm embedded in the structure of ordinary sentences. The algorithm was not in any intelligence manual, because Metz had invented it himself during his first week of captivity, writing it out by hand in a small notebook that the Vreth had allowed him to keep because it posed no obvious threat. Every letter Metz sent home contained data. The specific word choices, sentence lengths, and paragraph structures encoded information using a key that he had memorized, and that his sister, who was not actually an engineering student but an officer of Earth's intelligence division, decoded every time a letter arrived. He had been transmitting for 7 months without a single acknowledgement. He did not know if the letters were reaching Earth in time to matter. He did not know if the key he had invented was being understood correctly. He did not know if any of it was working. He kept writing anyway, because it was the only thing available to him that might help, and not doing it because the outcome was uncertain had never made sense to him. The summit ended 4 days later without Earth signing anything. Nan declined the modified proposal, declined the consultative role offer, and submitted instead a formal request for an independent timeline review of the Concorde's recognition vote, citing 3 specific procedural irregularities. The Vreth delegation responded with measured diplomatic language that translated, essentially, to, "This is going nowhere and Earth knows it." The Sorith Collective updated their documentary with a brief addendum segment. The new footage showed Nan leaving Meridian Hub, walking toward her transport. The narrator noted that humanity continued to reject realistic options in favor of feudal resistance, and that this was perhaps understandable given the scale of their loss. The segment was 8 minutes long. It was watched by about 400 million individuals across the Concorde's member species. Not one of them looked at the asteroid belt. Not one of them was counting the nodes. The galaxy had made a mistake that it did not know it had made yet. It had looked at humanity's loss and assumed that what it was watching was grief. It was not grief. It was preparation. And there is a significant difference between the two, particularly when the species doing the preparing has spent 8 months building the foundation for something the galaxy never saw coming, in the dark, in pieces, in 47 places at once. The summit recordings were filed in the Concorde's archive. The Sorith documentary was added to their media library. Overseer Rek returned to Titan Station and submitted his recommendation that the Dominion proceed with full infrastructure integration of the station's systems. By the time that recommendation was approved, Operation Bedrock was at 89%. Time was running out, but not for Earth. There is a particular kind of readiness that has nothing to do with excitement. It is not the sharpness before a fight or the tension of waiting for something unknown. It is something quieter. It is the feeling of a person who has checked everything 3 times, found nothing wrong, and simply knows that when the moment arrives they will be exactly where they need to be, doing exactly what needs to be done. That was the quality that filled Earth's strategic planning building on the morning that Hal Stroud walked in and posted a single number on the main operations board. 85%. He did not explain it to the people who had not been read in. He did not need to. The 12 people in the room who understood what it meant looked at the number and understood what came next. Stroud sat down across from Admiral Okafor at the long table, and they did what they had done every week for the past 11 months. they reviewed the numbers together. Not because either of them had missed anything in their individual reviews. Because two minds going through the same data caught things that one mind missed. And because they had learned to trust that process over years of working together on things that could not afford to be wrong. The distributed network's 47 nodes were running. 39 were fully operational. 8 were at partial capacity with completion timelines between 2 and 6 weeks. The combined output had passed 85% of Titan's former refinery production 3 days ago and was climbing. Fuel reserves at Earth's secondary distribution points were at their highest level in 14 months. The fleet's operational range had been quietly restored, not through any single spectacular act, but through 11 months of small, unglamorous work done by crews who mostly did not know the full picture of what they were part of. "We can sustain a full fleet operation," Okafor said. It was not a question. She was saying it out loud to confirm it, to make it a fixed and stated thing rather than a conclusion still living in a report. "Yes," Stroud said. "And if we take losses in a recovery operation, the network absorbs the impact. We are not fragile anymore. We have not been fragile for about 6 weeks, but I wanted the buffer higher before saying so." Okafor looked at the fleet deployment map. Her ships were distributed across training exercise corridors, which was where they had been quietly positioned over the past 4 months under routine movement orders that the Vreth's intelligence service had flagged and then decided were just that, routine movements. The Vreth's understanding of how humanity organized fleet exercises was based on 17 years of observation, all of which had occurred before Earth decided to stop being predictable. "Metz's maps," Okafor said. "How confident is the insertion team?" "They have run the corridors in simulation 412 times, Stroud said. "The last 60 runs, they completed the 3 objectives within the target time on every attempt. The maps are 11 months old, but Pharaoh's coded transmissions have given us updates on any changes the Vreth made to the sections the insertion team will pass through. There have been 3 minor route modifications, all accounted for." Okafor nodded slowly. "And Pharaoh knows the signal?" "She has been waiting for it since month 2, Stroud said. "It is a specific frequency variation in the standard Concord welfare check broadcast, the one that reaches Titan every 14 days. She watches for it every time. We confirm she received the last test signal 2 weeks ago through her response pattern in the following letter home." Her response pattern in a letter. She embedded it in the way she described her breakfast. Okafor looked at him for a moment. "We have remarkable people." "Yes," Stroud said, in a tone that made it sound less like a compliment and more like an observation about a natural fact, the way one might note that water was wet. He pulled up the next document. "The decoy operation. General Way's team has selected a Vreth supply convoy running between Dominion space and their outer patrol lines. Real military value, not inflated. The Vreth will respond with carriers. Based on every engagement pattern we have recorded over the last 8 years, we calculate they will pull at least 2 of Titan's 3 carrier groups to respond. That leaves 1 carrier group on the station. 1 carrier group, a garrison of approximately 4,000 soldiers, and a weapons grid that will be offline for 11 minutes during the power coupling exploit." He paused. "Our insertion team is 200 Marines. The garrison outnumbers them 20 to 1. The Marines are not there to fight the garrison," Okafor said. "No, they are there to move civilians and restore control codes. The garrison will be dealing with a station that has just lost primary weapons, a command center under assault, and 380,000 civilians suddenly moving in organized groups through shelter corridors rather than staying in detention areas. The chaos is the weapon. How long do the Marines need? The insertion team says 28 minutes for the 3 objectives under optimal conditions. They have never run it in more than 34. Okafor pulled up the final element, the signal's core vessel. A converted civilian science ship, running under a research designation, positioned 4 months ago at a location in Titan's operational sphere that Metz's original burst transmission had identified as existing outside the station's standard sensor coverage. It had been sitting there for 16 weeks, running genuine atmospheric data collection on Saturn, producing real science that it transmitted to 3 universities. The Vreth had noticed it, checked it once, and classified it as uninteresting. In its secondary bay, behind the atmospheric monitoring equipment, was the most precisely calibrated narrow-band transmitter that Earth's Signals Division had ever built. It had one job: to broadcast a specific command sequence at the exact frequency that Colonel Farrow had encoded into her weekly letter, the frequency that matched the Vreth-installed defensive circuit in Titan's central power coupling. The frequency that would, when triggered, cause the system to enter an emergency recalibration mode that the Vreth had put there themselves as a safety measure and had never thought to remove. For 11 minutes, every offensive system drawing power from Titan's primary grid would go dark. "Brief the fleet commanders tonight," Okafor said. "I want every ship commander to know every detail, not just their piece. If something happens to a commander in the first hour, their second in command needs to be able to run the whole picture." Stroud gathered the documents. Before he stood up, he said, "There is one more thing." He put a file on the table. It was thin. Metz's letters from the past 6 weeks. His sister's team finished the full decode this morning. He has been watching the Vreth integrate Titan's power systems into their Dominion grid. He identified a second vulnerability, separate from the coupling exploit, in the external docking bay controls. He worked out a bypass sequence that would let our ships dock at Titan's secondary bay without triggering the proximity alert. Okafor read the first page. He invented a docking bypass in a detention block. With a notebook and a pen, Stroud said. He does not know we have been reading his letters. He does not know if any of it has been received. He has been sending this information for 7 months on the possibility that someone was listening. Someone was. Yes. Stroud stood up. The docking bypass has been verified by 3 independent teams. It works. We are incorporating it into the insertion plan. It saves the Marines approximately 4 minutes on approach. Okafor looked at the file for a moment longer. Then she set it down precisely, exactly aligned with the edge of the table, the way she did when a thing was settled in her mind and did not need to be picked up again. That evening, in a briefing room 2 floors below, she stood before 61 fleet commanders on a secure multi-location link. She did not welcome them or thank them for their service or speak about the weight of the moment. She put the operation on the screen and walked through it from start to finish, every phase, every contingency, every timeline. She answered 11 questions. She corrected 1 misunderstanding about the decoy force's withdrawal route. She did not raise her voice once. At the end she said, "We do not go in angry. We do not go in emotional. We go in knowing exactly what we are doing and why every step is the way it is. Angry people make mistakes. Prepared people finish the job. Any further questions?" There were none. She closed the link and stood alone in the briefing room. Through the building's thick walls, she could feel nothing of the outside world, not the city, not the sky, not Saturn's light 1 billion kilometers away. She looked at the operation plan on the screen for another minute, running through it one more time in her head the way she had done every night for 2 months. Everything was in place. Down in the message processing center, a routine Concord welfare broadcast was being assembled for its 14-day transmission cycle. One of Earth's signals operators, following a standing order from Okafor's office, added a frequency variation to a specific segment of the broadcast. The variation was tiny, almost nothing, a slight deviation in a minor carrier band that any monitoring system would classify as normal signal degradation over long distances. To anyone who was not looking for it, it was invisible. To Colonel Ines Farrow, who had been watching every welfare broadcast for 11 months, it was a word. It said, "Now?" It began not with a battle cry, but with a cargo manifest. 3 Vreth patrol vessels near the outer edge of Dominion-controlled space received a standard automated alert at 0112 station time. A human convoy of 11 vessels was moving through a trade corridor 20 light hours from Titan, on a heading consistent with resupply operations for Earth's outer colony at Grella Point. The vessels were broadcasting proper identification codes. Their course was logged in the Concorde's open traffic registry. The patrol vessels noted the convoy and moved on. 20 minutes later, 7 of those 11 ships peeled off their logged heading, dropped to minimum emission travel, and began a very different course. The other 4 continued on to Grella Point exactly as the manifest said. If anyone asked, they could confirm they had been part of a resupply run. Nobody asked, because the Vreth's attention was already moving somewhere else entirely. At 0148, Earth's decoy strike force hit a Vreth supply convoy running between Dominion space and the outer patrol line. It was not a feint. Okafor had made that clear in the briefing. The strike force went in with real weapons, real intent, and a carefully calculated amount of force, enough to do genuine damage and pose a genuine threat, not enough to trigger a total war response. The Vreth convoy called for help immediately. Titan Station's command responded by dispatching 2 of its 3 carrier groups. The decision took 4 minutes. It was the right call by every standard Vreth military doctrine had established over 300 years of experience. A real attack required a real response. 2 carrier groups would overwhelm the Earth strike force and protect the convoy. The remaining carrier group was more than sufficient to hold a station that nobody was attacking. This was correct in every way except one. Someone was attacking the station. They just had not started yet. The converted science vessel sitting in Saturn's shadow had been running its atmospheric equipment all night. At 0203, the operator in the secondary bay powered up the narrowband transmitter and ran through the pre-transmission checklist one more time, which took 90 seconds, which was 40 seconds longer than it needed to be, because she wanted to be absolutely certain before she sent a signal that could not be recalled. She sent it at 0205. The signal reached Titan Station in just under 4 minutes, traveling at the speed of light across the dark between Saturn's rings. It arrived on a frequency that Titan's monitoring systems categorized as background noise. It arrived at the external sensor node nearest to the power coupling junction, and the circuit there, the one the Vreth had installed as a safety precaution during their first week of occupation, received it and did what it had been designed to do. It triggered an emergency recalibration cycle. Every offensive system drawing from Titan's primary power grid went offline simultaneously. Every weapons port, every active jamming array, every directed energy defense system. For 11 minutes, Titan Station was a large container with no teeth. 300 meters above Titan's south polar region, 8 stealth dropships that had been coasting on cold thrusters for the last 2 hours fired their mains for the first time. They came in fast through the thin nitrogen atmosphere and hit the secondary docking bay approach with the precision of people who had practiced it 412 times in simulation and were now doing it for the first time in reality and found that reality matched the simulation almost exactly because Metz's maps had been that good. The 200 Marines went through the hatch in 4 minutes. Colonel Ines Farrow had been awake since the welfare broadcast arrived 2 weeks ago. Not all at once. She had slept, eaten, done the things a person does to stay functional. But she had been counting down from the moment she saw the signal. She had spent those 2 weeks doing something that looked to the Vreth guards like nothing at all, talking to people. She had been doing it for 11 months, quietly, daily, the way water works on stone. She knew which sublevel corridors the guards checked first during an alert and which ones they covered last. She knew the shift rotation schedule so precisely that she could have written it down from memory without error. She knew which of her garrison personnel were still sharp and which were running on fumes. She had put the sharp ones in the right places. When the power coupling triggered and the lights in the detention block flickered, she did not wait for anything else. She had given the garrison their instructions in pieces over the preceding weeks, each piece casual enough to not look like preparation. Now the pieces came together. The detention block's internal locks ran on a secondary power circuit, not the primary grid. They did not go offline with the weapon systems. But the Vreth guard posted at the main corridor gate used a personal authorization device that connected to the station's access network, which did run on the primary grid, and when the grid cycled into recalibration, that device stopped working. The guard reached for his manual backup. Pharaoh's sergeant was already there. What followed was fast and not particularly dramatic. The garrison soldiers were not armed, had not been armed for 11 months, and they did not need to be. They knew where they were going. They moved with the organized certainty of people who have been told their role in a plan and have had time to think about it until it is part of them. The civilian population, 380,000 people who had lived under occupation for a year and had been waiting, perhaps without knowing what exactly they were waiting for, responded to the garrison personnel with a speed that surprised even Pharaoh. When someone in uniform says, calmly and clearly, that it is time to move to the shelter corridors, and the lights have just flickered, and something in the air has changed, people move. The 3 objectives of the insertion team were, clear the civilian population into shelter corridors, reach the command center, and restore Earth's control codes to Titan's primary systems. They completed the first in 22 minutes. They reached the command center in 27. They had the control codes entered and the authentication sequence running at 31 minutes and 40 seconds after entry. When Titan's systems came back online, they responded to Earth's codes. The weapons grid powered up. The communications array came back to Earth frequencies. The docking bay access systems switched control authorization. Titan Station, in the space of half a minute, stopped being a Vreth installation and became an Earth One. The Vreth garrison of 4,000 soldiers found themselves in a station where every door, every system, every lock and corridor light was now controlled by people they had been holding prisoner. The tactical position did not require much analysis. The Vreth commander sent a signal to the remaining carrier group requesting support. The remaining carrier group began launching assault craft. They met Okafor's main fleet, which had been holding at the far edge of sensor range for 6 hours, running silent, waiting for the weapons grid to come back online under the right codes. It was not a clean fight. Okafor had not promised anyone that it would be. 3 of her capital ships took heavy damage. 1 was lost with most of its crew. The battle lasted 5 hours and 40 minutes, and in those hours Earth paid a price that was real and would not be undone. But the Vreth carrier group, fighting alone, without the 2 carrier groups that were still engaged with the decoy strike force 4 light hours away, could not hold. They withdrew in good order because Okafor let them, because a surrounded enemy fights harder and a retreating one stops shooting. The 2 Vreth carrier groups that had responded to the decoy operation turned back toward Titan when the station's systems changed hands. They arrived to find Titan's weapons grid fully operational under Earth's control and Okafor's fleet positioned between them and the station. The calculation was not difficult. They stopped, held position for 4 hours while their commanders sent messages back to the Dominion, and then withdrew. The Vreth garrison on the station was taken into custody by Pharaoh's garrison troops, who had been in custody themselves for 12 months and handled the reversal with a professionalism that was, depending on how you looked at it, either admirable or slightly unsettling. Pharaoh walked into what had been the station's primary command center, stepping over the cables the Vreth had run across the floor during their occupation, and stood in front of the main display. Titan's system status was green across every board. The refinery was offline for safety reasons and would need restart procedures. The shipyard was intact. The civilian population was in the shelter corridors, which were large enough and well supplied enough to hold them comfortably while the station was cleared. She sat in the command chair because it was there and she had been on her feet for 19 hours, and she looked at the display for a while. Someone came through the door behind her and said, "Colonel, we found Mets." The Galactic Concord's legal review session had been running for 2 days when the news arrived. The session itself had been Ambassador Nan's doing, a procedural challenge she had filed weeks earlier contesting technical irregularities in the original recognition vote. Everyone in the chamber knew it was going nowhere. The Vreth's legal team had prepared a thorough rebuttal. The Sorith Collective's delegates had submitted written opinions supporting the Vreth position. The Duran Republic had sent a junior representative rather than a senior one, which was their polite way of signaling they did not think the session mattered enough to require real attention. Nand had spent both days asking precise, careful questions that required precise, careful answers, and the session had ground along the way sessions do when one party is fully committed to making the machinery move at its own pace. On the morning of the 3rd day, the Concord's communications coordinator received a signal priority flagged across multiple channels at once, which was unusual, and stepped down to the floor of the chamber to deliver a message slip to the session chair, which was extremely unusual. The chair read the slip, read it again, and then said something that caused every translator device in the room to output a phrase that meant, in various languages, "1 moment, please." The session paused. The information spread through the chamber the way information always spreads in a room full of very alert, politically experienced beings. First in whispers, then in a wave, then in a silence so complete that the ventilation system became audible. Titan Station had been recovered by Earth. Not in 3 years. Not after a decade of negotiation. 12 months after its capture, to almost the exact day, it was back under Earth's control codes, Earth's weapons grid, and Earth's administrative authority. The Vreth garrison had surrendered. The Vreth carrier groups had withdrawn. 380,000 civilians were free. Nan sat at the human delegations table and let the information circulate for about 4 minutes. She watched the room without appearing to watch it. The Sorith delegates, whose skin patterns had been running calm commercial rhythms for 2 days, were now cycling through something faster and more fragmented. The Vreth legal team had stopped talking to each other and were sending transmissions instead, which was the Vreth equivalent of shock, the retreat from verbal communication into recorded documentation. Counselor Durin, who had attended in person despite sending a junior representative initially, as if reconsidering halfway through, was looking at his desk. He looked up and met Nan's eyes once. She held his gaze for a moment and then looked away, not unkindly. She stood up and addressed the session chair. "I would like to formally withdraw the procedural challenge," she said. "The grounds for which it was filed have changed significantly." Then she reached into the document file in front of her and pulled out a second submission, one she had prepared before the session began and had been carrying for 9 days. "In its place, I would like to submit a motion requesting that the Galactic Concord open a formal review of the Vreth Dominion's original action against Titan Station for classification as an illegal annexation, and that this review include an examination of the conditions under which Earth's civilian population was held during the occupation." There was a long pause. The session chair asked if the Vreth delegation wished to respond. The Vreth's lead legal representative said that his delegation required time to consult with the Dominion before responding to any new motions. "Of course," Nan said and sat down. The vote on the review motion was held the following morning. 12 delegations that had abstained or voted with the Vreth in the original recognition vote switched their position. The motion passed. It was not, as several commentators across the Concord's media networks noted, the same as a finding of wrongdoing. It was a review. It was the opening of a process that would take a long time and might produce no binding result. But 12 votes had moved. In a body that had voted 31-1 against Earth 12 months earlier, 12 votes moving was not a small thing. On Earth, there was no official celebration. No parade was organized. No public holiday was declared. The government issued a brief statement confirming the recovery of Titan Station and the safe condition of the civilian population, and then Earth's global information networks carried something else, a live feed from Titan. It showed the station running, the refinery operations restarting in the lower processing levels, technicians moving through corridors that had been sealed for a year, systems coming back online board by board. The shipyard scaffolding was already being reconfigured. Somewhere in the background of one feed, a crew was repainting a wall, covering the Vreth administrative markings with the standard gray-white of Earth's interior specifications. Colonel Farrow sent a transmission from the primary command center. She had not prepared a speech. She sat in front of the camera for a moment and then said, "We are home. Begin the next shift." That was all. People who watched the feed later said that the most striking thing about it was how quickly the station looked normal. Within 18 hours of recovery, Titan was running at 30% capacity. Within 2 days, 60%. The supply convoys that Stroud had pre-positioned 3 weeks earlier, sitting at waypoints logged as routine logistics traffic, arrived on schedule with everything needed for the restart. The crews knew their procedures because they had rehearsed them, because Stroud had required it, because a restart plan that only existed in documents was a plan that would fail under pressure. Across the Concord, the species that monitored Earth's situation found the recovery difficult to process. Not the military aspect. Fighting back was something every species understood. What was difficult was the speed at which Titan became functional again. Every species that had experienced a major installation loss in recorded history treated recovery as a process of years. Infrastructure had to be rebuilt, supply lines reestablished, populations resettled, traumatized, housed. Titan's refinery was running in 48 hours. The shipyard received its first repair vessel in 72 hours. The civilian population, 380,000 people, was fully integrated back into normal station life in 6 days. The Sorith Collective quietly deleted the pre-prepared media package titled The End of Human Expansion. They replaced it with a much shorter segment that they filed under analysis and commentary rather than documentary, noting without firm conclusions that Earth's recovery timeline was without precedent. They did not have enough information yet to explain why. and the Sorith did not broadcast things they could not explain confidently, because their reputation was worth more than a fast story. Counselor Duran sent Nand a private message. It was brief. It said, "You were telling the truth in that corridor." Nand read it and wrote back 2 sentences. "I was. I usually am." She did not elaborate. She did not need to. The Vreth Dominion Strategic Council filed reports, conducted reviews, commissioned analyses. Their conclusions were methodical and honest, which was a characteristic of Vreth institutional culture that Stroud had always respected, even while finding them deeply frustrating to deal with. They had miscalculated. They knew it. What they were trying to understand was where the miscalculation had occurred, so that it did not occur again. They would find the distributed network eventually. They were already asking the right questions, but finding it would take time, and by the time they found it, the network would have had additional months of operational history, additional hardening, additional redundancy built in. Stroud was already working on the next iteration. Okafor submitted her after-action report to Earth's War Council 11 days after the recovery. It was 43 pages long. It included a full accounting of every engagement, every vessel lost, every crew member killed, every decision that had been made and why, and every place where things had not gone according to plan and what had been done to compensate. It listed 27 operational lessons and 17 recommendations. Its final paragraph said, "We have answered one question that was asked of us by Force 12 months ago. The question was whether Earth could be permanently weakened by the loss of a single point of strength. We have answered it. The Vreth Dominion and any other party watching should understand that this is what we do. We come back. We rebuild. We return. That is not a threat. It is a description of what we are." The report was classified at the highest level. It was also, through a channel that Lena Pohl managed carefully and that left no traceable origin point, delivered to the major Concord powers within 48 hours. Not as a leak. Not as propaganda. As information. Here is what happened. Here is how it happened. Here is what it tells you about the species you have been watching for the past 12 months. Read it at your own pace. Do the math yourself. In Titan's Signals Bay, on the 31st day after recovery, Lieutenant Dario Metz sat at the primary diagnostic station and ran routine system checks. The bay smelled like machinery and recycled air, the same as every Signals Bay on every human installation, a smell he had not particularly noticed before he spent 11 months without it. A colleague came in to check on something and noticed he was running the diagnostics manually rather than using the automated cycle. "You know the system can do that on its own," she said. "I know," Metz said. He kept running them manually. She watched him for a moment. What was it like? Sending data for 7 months without knowing if anyone was receiving it. He thought about it the way he thought about most things, not quickly, but carefully, turning the question over to see all its sides. "I knew what I was seeing," he said. "I knew it mattered. I could not control whether anyone was listening. I could only control whether I was transmitting." He paused and looked at the board in front of him, all green. "So I transmitted." She waited to see if there was more. "And someone was listening," he said. "And they were smart enough to use it." He checked the final diagnostic reading and logged it. That is all it ever needed to be. Outside the Signals Bay, through 3 levels of structure and a kilometer of station, Saturn's rings caught the distant sun and scattered light across a sky that had no one in it now but Earth's ships. The galaxy had planned to celebrate. It had prepared the language, assembled the media packages, arranged the political machinery for a future in which humanity occupied a smaller, quieter corner of the stars. That future had been canceled before anyone outside of a few offices in Nairobi and one science vessel in Saturn's shadow had known it was being canceled. It had been canceled in asteroid fields and detention blocks and weekly letters home and pre-positioned supply convoys and simulation runs and coded welfare broadcasts and 47 small, unremarkable installations that individually looked like nothing worth watching. Humanity had lost Titan in a single night. It had been winning it back every day since.